The year is 2023. The sequel to The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild has just released, and you can't wait to jump back into that familiar Hyrule and catch up with the locals. Boasting mystical sky islands and treacherous dark caverns, this game immensely improved upon its predecessor, refining the gameplay and exploration into a nearly perfect state. However, if I were to choose which new addition to the game has been the most impactful, it would have to be the depths. An inverted mirror of the surface, this gigantic subterranean world harbors many mysteries. While some of these mysteries may unfortunately be lost to time, potentially forever, there's one aspect of the depths that will never fade into obscurity. One simple detail that has been completely overlooked for 2 entire decades. A connection so crucial that I think you'll see Tears of the Kingdom in a new way after hearing it. Such an incredible discovery is far too heavy for me to carry alone, so today I'll be joined by Konrad from the Commonwealth realm to see if we can lay the groundwork for uncovering one of the deepest secrets in the history of Zelda. Konrad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gossip Geist. In order to properly tell the story of how we were able to discover this buried secret, let me first start by tracing our steps back to the very beginning, all the way back to the legendary golden relic itself, the Triforce. During the events of Ocarina of Time, the current location of the Triforce is within the Sacred Realm, locked deep within the Temple of Time. Once Link gathered the 3 spiritual stones and pulled the Master Sword, he unknowingly allowed Ganondorf access to the Sacred Realm, in which he attempted to steal the Triforce. His evil heart was not in alignment, thus the Sacred Realm was corrupted into the Evil Realm, and the Triforce split into 3 pieces. Ultimately, he was only able to lay claim to the Triforce piece of power, but it was enough to turn him into the Demon King who ruled over Hyrule with an iron fist for the next 7 years. Link, after cleansing the 6 temples and awakening the 7 sages, was now ready to confront Ganondorf and pry Hyrule from his grasp. Emerging victorious, Zelda, along with the other sages, sealed Ganon away inside the Evil Realm, bringing peace back to the land of Hyrule once more. Our story continues with the opening of the Wind Waker, where the events of Ocarina of Time and what unfolded after it are retold. Ganon, who was sealed within the Evil Realm, eventually broke free from his seal and crept forth from the depths of the earth. This part is actually quite strange when you think about it. If he was supposedly sealed inside the Evil Realm, then why is it that he is emerging from the ground when the seal had been broken? The Sacred Realm has always been depicted as being adrift in a sea of clouds, surrounded by open skies, a place that you would assume to be far above the land of Hyrule. Well, after doing some digging, it looks like we might have been sorely mistaken as to the location of the Sacred Realm all this time.
In order to make sense out of this, we have to rewind back to the exact time that Ganondorf was being sealed away by the 7 sages. Just before this happens, Rauru asks the ancient creators of Hyrule to open the sealed door and send the evil incarnation of darkness into the void of the Evil Realm. This line of dialogue wouldn't normally catch anyone's attention, but if we refer to the Japanese version of the game, this entire line takes on a completely different meaning. Ancient gods who created Hyrule, now is the time to open the sealed door and bury the evil incarnation of darkness in the depths of the Netherworld. Bury the depths, Netherworld. These words keep showing up again and again. Was the Evil Realm not actually contained within a different dimension like we all had originally assumed? Going off of this information, along with the fact that Ganondorf emerged from the earth in the Wind Waker upon his return, we can only assume now that the location of the Evil Realm is actually in a place far below Hyrule's surface. A place that we are all very familiar with thanks to Tears of the Kingdom. Have you ever thought to yourself, why in the world were the Zonai digging this deep beneath Hyrule Castle? Well, I've got an answer for you that you probably didn't anticipate. It turns out that the Zonai weren't the ones who made this hole. This massive cavern was already here since before their arrival. The Zonai built their way down into it and discovered an immense chamber. This chamber could very well have been the exact location of the Evil Realm where Ganondorf eventually broke free from and emerged from the earth above. At first, you might be thinking to yourself that sure, it makes sense based on the wording used, but it still feels like there's a few pieces missing from the puzzle. You're absolutely right. There is much more to this discovery than simply locating the Evil Realm. If you remember how the timeline split happens in Ocarina of Time, then you know that Link, the hero of time, is either defeated, he is victorious, or he is never seen or heard from again. These three outcomes each have drastically different repercussions on the state of the Sacred Realm. In the Downfall timeline, Ganon obtains the full Triforce, but is sealed away inside the Evil Realm, which then becomes the Dark World, transformed by Ganon's wish upon the Triforce. This is later reverted in future games, and the Sacred Realm once again is returned to normal. In the Child timeline, Ganondorf is prevented from entering the Sacred Realm altogether, never allowing it to be twisted into the Evil Realm. But in the Adult timeline, it was never fixed. The 7 sages sealed Ganon in the Evil Realm, which he eventually broke free from, but it was never brought back to its original state. The Sacred Realm in the Adult timeline remained as the Evil Realm, or should I say, the Depths, forever.
Taking the Adult timeline into account, how else can we prove the connection of the Evil Realm to the Depths? Throughout the events of the Wind Waker, you can find several Koroks planting trees on the many small islands that dot the Great Sea. The Great Deku Tree tells us that the forests that bloom from those trees hold great power. They can change one tiny island into a much larger land. Soon, a day will come when all the islands are one, connected by earth and growth. Listening to this, it seems that it's only a matter of time before the Great Sea becomes fully engulfed by the islands above, forming a new layer of earth of the remains of the old Hyrule. However, at the end of the Wind Waker, King Daphnis used the Triforce to wash away the old kingdom of Hyrule. With the previous kingdom now gone, Link and Zelda set off on a journey to rebuild their lost homeland, eventually establishing New Hyrule. After they left the Great Sea behind, the land below the waves began to wash away. The growth of the islands slowly encapsulates the old Hyrule, forming a new continent after several millennia had passed. The ethereal waters below the new layer of earth that once covered the old Hyrule eventually dissipated, creating a massive open cavern in which only pure darkness remains. In Tears of the Kingdom, we can observe visual evidence that the depths was once submerged underwater for thousands of years. The plant life comes off as very aquatic, having a natural bend to some of them, as if being pushed by the current of water. The sediment found on the floor is similar to sand, or debris you would find at the bottom of the sea. Finally, we can see massive root-like structures that stretch from the ceiling down to the floor everywhere we go. This is more evidence that the many forests the Koroks had planted above were growing over the top of the Great Sea, taking root into the old Hyrule to stabilize the newly formed landmasses above. When the Zonai descended upon the new land, there were only small and primitive settlements to be found. The old kingdom was nowhere in sight, nor was there any evidence of there ever being any. So the Zonai founded what they had assumed to be the very first kingdom of Hyrule. Sometime after their arrival, the Zonai enacted their mining operation that sometimes yielded unexpected bounties. All across the depths, they began unearthing relic after relic belonging to an ancient and forgotten history. A history that we ourselves should be familiar with. This is yet another piece of evidence that the depths may very well have once been the old Hyrule we all knew and loved before it was erased from memory.
Now, there is a few counter-arguments to this theory that I would like to address first before we continue. How do we explain the Temple of Time on the Great Plateau? That's simple. It isn't the same Temple of Time as the one seen in Ocarina of Time. It's a similar recreation, but it isn't the original. In Twilight Princess, a game that takes place roughly 100 to maybe 200 years if I'm being extremely generous after Ocarina of Time, the same Temple of Time is seen in an absolutely deplorable state. This neglected temple is falling apart and is quickly being overtaken by nature. You mean to tell me that the same Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time is supposed to exist in Breath of the Wild tens of thousands of years later when it can't even survive for more than 200? Yeah, I highly doubt they're the same temple. So then, what about Lon Lon Ranch? That's also found in Breath of the Wild, so if the old Hyrule was flooded, then why does it still exist? If we look at Hyrule Encyclopedia, page 59, it claims that elevated areas in Ocarina of Time survived the flood and became islands in the Wind Waker. Realistically speaking, hardly any of the areas in Ocarina of Time were very elevated in the first place, except maybe Death Mountain. But if we're supposed to go by this logic, then Lon Lon Ranch should have easily survived the flood because it's actually located on top of a large hill in the center of Hyrule Field. It's actually one of the most elevated places in all of Hyrule for that matter. Lon Lon Ranch does not make an appearance though in the Wind Waker, which is strange, but it might have been due to a developmental decision that led to its absence. I mean, think about it. An island that's just a wide open pasture and a barn off to the side? That's a pretty weird thing to imagine being on a very small and cramped island. On the bright side, the developers did not leave Lon Lon Ranch out of the Wind Waker completely, because within the cafe on Windfall Island, once again we can find an item for sale on their menu which turns out to be Lon Lon Milk. Man, this one sign sure has come in handy recently. Anyway, as you can see, Lon Lon Milk is still being supplied to this cafe from somewhere. We just weren't given the ability to visit the ranch itself in the Wind Waker, which is a shame, but it is what it is.
The next counter-argument is the existence of the Springs of Courage, Power and Wisdom in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In Skyward Sword, these springs were always depicted as being at the peak of a mountain, or at least highly elevated. In Breath of the Wild, however, they are all surface level with the exception of the Spring of Wisdom, which is on top of Mount Lanayru. There is a debate to be made on which of the two springs from Skyward Sword is their Breath of the Wild counterpart. But what matters in the end is that they were all clearly located higher up than their surroundings. Hence, they would have survived the eventual flood. The fact that the surface level springs are no longer elevated suggests that they were just barely high enough to not be engulfed by the Great Sea, and the expanding islands leveled out the area around them. The next question I find myself asking is the following. What happened to the Triforce? After King Daphnes made his wish in the Wind Waker, the fully assembled Triforce was lost at the bottom of the sea along with the Master Sword, the Blade of Evil's Bane, which we'll talk about in a moment. If the Triforce was lost at sea, then I guess that could explain why the Triforce is almost completely absent in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, right? Actually, it isn't. Zelda, when fighting Calamity Ganon at the end of Breath of the Wild, summoned the power of the Triforce to deal the finishing blow, sealing him away in a flash of light. The Triforce can again be seen in Tears of the Kingdom, fully assembled on the back of Zelda's hand, as she clutches the Master Sword before she enters her nearly eternal slumber. This is all the proof we need that Zelda has all three pieces of the Triforce within herself, and her family has unknowingly been passing it down from mother to daughter for countless generations. But what you might be asking right now is how the Triforce is in her possession to begin with. The Wind Waker itself answered this question at the very beginning of the game. Link left Hyrule to embark on a new journey after he was sent back to his own time period. The act of physically leaving the region of Hyrule caused his connection to the Triforce piece of courage to break, forcing it to leave his body and return to Hyrule. Based on this information, we can assume that the Triforce is not allowed to leave Hyrule under any circumstances. After Ganon is defeated at the end of the Wind Waker, Link and Zelda leave Hyrule behind, which also prevented them from reclaiming their piece of the Triforce. As a result, without a single person worthy of inheriting the fully assembled Triforce, it waited until someone was born with the blood of the goddess once again within the land of Hyrule. After all, it was Hylia herself who was tasked with safeguarding the Triforce by the three golden goddesses. So it would make sense that the first person who would inherit the Triforce would be the blood of the one who was responsible for protecting it ages ago.
Now there is another possibility when it comes to the fully assembled Triforce appearing within the daughters of the royal bloodline. An explanation that could also tell us what happened to the Master Sword and why it was never present or known about in Tears of the Kingdom's memories. The Zonai simply hadn't found either of them yet during their mining operations. Rauru, Sonia, Minoru, and Ganondorf all had absolutely no idea about the existence of the Master Sword or the location of the Triforce because neither of them were ever unearthed. We know for a fact that the departure of Rauru and Minoru was not the last time a Zonai was ever seen thanks to the ancient hero's aspect. 10,000 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, the princess who carried the blood of the goddess, alongside the spirit of the hero wielding the sword that seals the darkness, met Calamity Ganon in battle and won with the help of the ancient Sheikah's technological prowess. This mural depicts the Triforce being used by Zelda, as well as the Master Sword being used by the ancient hero, so we know for a fact that these two relics were eventually found. But how? Thanks to Zelda's meddling in the past, during the era of the Zonai, she mentions the Master Sword and how it is the only weapon that can defeat the Demon King. After the people of that era were made aware of the Master Sword's existence, it would make sense that they would prioritize finding the blade that should still exist somewhere within the Hyrule in their own time period. If the Demon King were to ever break free from his seal again sooner than Zelda's warning suggested he would, then they would need to have that weapon ready to face off against him, so they began looking for it. Upon finding it, they discovered the Triforce as well, which was then inherited into the royal bloodline from that point forward. You might bring up the fact that Sonia had the Triforce painted on her hand, and that's a good observation to make. If you've been following along so far, then you'll remember that the islands that eventually grew over the Great Sea and became the new surface of Hyrule contained Hylians on them. These Hylians were very well aware of the existence of the Triforce, so they definitely wouldn't have forgotten about it by the time the Zonai had arrived. Sonia not having the Triforce in her possession makes sense, because when we see both Sonia and Zelda utilizing their magical abilities, Sonia has to focus, while Zelda's power is overwhelmingly stronger without even trying. Her secret stone amplifies her abilities, but the secret stone is being amplified by the power of the Triforce. You could say that her bloodline containing both light and time magic was responsible for this, but if you remember, secret stones take on a single attribute of their wearer, and Zelda's took on the attribute of time, not light. Sonia lacks the element of light, so the magic she's demonstrating here is time magic. Zelda should be struggling to match Sonia's time magic, but instead she accidentally eclipses Sonia. This is absolutely the Triforce at work here.
Although the placement of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom on the timeline is still heavy debatable, with the latest Famitsu interview from Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi with more information that could assist us on solving this puzzle. We would like to make a suggestion that the timelines do converge into a single point, but not in the way that most would assume. Instead of all three timelines coming together, what about the Downfall timeline and the Child timeline converging into the Adult timeline? This will be the only way to seal the deal on how the world of the Adult timeline remains the same, while the games from the other timelines are heavily referenced. It also can explain how the Zora and the Rito are able to exist side by side within both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
You know, fancy you should mention that, Konrad, because I actually do have a video that explores that exact topic. In fact, the video you're watching right now is a direct continuation of that video, so you better go check it out if you want to know the full story. Thank you so much for joining me today, Konrad. You're the man.
It was my pleasure.
Please be sure to head on over to the Commonwealth Realms channel and check out his brand new Zora timeline video, and it's the perfect thing to watch to catch yourself up before you watch part 1 of this video, if you haven't already, that is. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed yourself, there's much more to come in the future, so please subscribe and stick around for another onslaught of Zelda lore from Gossip Geist.
Hey!